Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have Jasper. Join us for another Relationship Anarchy research conversation. Together we talk about embracing our interconnectedness, moving at the speed of trust, and finding security in your community. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. I am so delighted to have all of you pleasure activists from around the world tuning in for another episode each Wednesday. My name is Nicole. I am a sex and relationship psychotherapist with training in psychedelic integration therapy, and I am also the founder of the Pleasure Practice, supporting individuals in crafting expansive sex lives and intimate relationships. Dear listener, I am so excited to share this episode with you. You know, dear listener, that these Relationship Anarchist episodes are some of my favorite episodes of the podcast. I learn so much through every single one of these conversations, and it is such a joy to share this with you. In my last episode, episode 200, I talked a lot about the political nature of relationship anarchy and the lack of language and access to resources on relationship anarchy for our community. And so every time that I get to make one of these, I am so honored to be creating resources for this movement, to be a part of this movement, and that listeners from around the world trust me to come onto this show. Like, what an honor, dear listener. Yeah. If you are a relationship anarchist and you're passionate about this like me and you want to have a conversation with me, or if you just want to submit your written answers to these questions, there is a link in the show notes below to my website where I have been collecting all of the relationship anarchy data and opening up these conversations with you, dear listener. So if you've been waiting, now is the time to dive in. And I am so excited to get to hear your voice and your thoughts on relationship anarchy. All right, dear listener, if you are ready to liberate your pleasure, you can explore my offerings and resources at modernanarchypodcast.com, linked in the show notes below. And I want to say the biggest thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. You are supporting the long-term sustainability of the podcast, keeping this content free and accessible to all people. So thank you. If you want to join the Patreon community, get exclusive access into my research and personal exploration, then you can head on over to patreon.com/modernanarchypodcast, also linked in the show notes below. And with that, dear listener, please know that I am sending you all my love, and let's tune in to today's episode. And the first question that I ask each guest is, how would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Well, my name is Jasper Brown, and I use he, or they pronouns. And I am an artist and activist living in New England.
Welcome to the show. I'm delighted to have you today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Relationship anarchy. Like I was saying before we dove into the recording, these are my favorite conversations that I've been having on the podcast. And so I'm really excited to see where our collective consciousness go and what sort of conversation we create today.
I'm excited too. As I said earlier, I do listen to this podcast, and so I'm like kind of having like when you like see a famous actress or something, and you're just like, this person's so cool, and then you're having like so that's why I'm kind of sweating a lot right now, so I'm glad this is like only my shoulders up and just my voice for the podcast.
I appreciate that because, like I said again earlier, I always go, God, is my content still good out there anymore? You know, the more you change and evolve, you look back on your past self and you're like, I didn't know shit. You know what I mean? So I'm really happy to hear that it's still like resonating and feeling good for people. So that's awesome and helpful for my own insecure parts as well. So thank you.
Yeah, as an
Yeah.
artist, I don't look back at any of my
Nope.
old
Nope.
writing or
Nope.
any of my poetry, and I'm just like, nope, this was written by a past Jasper, and they don't need
Totally.
to see what
Nope.
the hell that was. So I
Exactly.
understand.
Exactly. Well, the
Hmm.
first question of the research is, what is relationship anarchy?
Hmm. I
Hmm.
feel like I've had to answer that question for people so often, and I feel like it changes based on who I'm talking to.
Sure.
And I've because you know what like relationship anarchy is, and a lot of the people who come on to this podcast also know what it is and have nuances around it. I often describe it as a commitment to the freedom of relating and connecting to the life around me and the commitment to the joy and change that come along with it. So human and other than human life, like plants, even sometimes I'm
Sure.
like, yeah, I'm in relationship with burdock right now because I'm learning how to heal my gut. So like
Hmm.
stuff like that. It's also a commitment to healing, which I wasn't expecting, but it's really a big part of relationship anarchy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I heard the words joy that stuck out to me, change, oof,
Mhm.
and healing. Yeah, I'm curious if you want to, choose which word to unpack on or all of them. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that's shown up for you.
Yeah, sure. I discovered relationship anarchy on the coattails of a breakup from the longest relationship I've ever been in, which in the grand scheme of things really isn't that long at all.
Mm.
But they left and said, I'm going to go practice what I was practicing before I was dating you monogamously, which was relationship anarchy. And I was like, insecure about that, but not admitting to myself that I was feeling insecure or why I was feeling insecure. And so I just kind of was like, fuck you, monogamy's the best. Ha ha ha. Like, I'm going to be happier than you. And then we just didn't talk for like 3 months because we were friends before this too. So it was hard, I think, for me to like separate the two, which is
Mhm.
again where the healing I think came in as well as the
Mm.
change. And then they passed me the book Polysecure by Jessica Fern. And I
Mm.
started reading it and was like, oh, look at all these attachment issues I've got. Look at all these things that I need to do to heal myself.
Yeah,
and,
it's
and so that
overwhelming,
started the
right?
journey.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel that it opened the Pandora's box.
Yeah. And I'm curious for you too. Like, what was that like oof moment for you just to be like, oh, yeah, this is not just, liberating myself, but also like this is going to touch some things that are like still open wounds and I need to kind of
Sure.
sit with that.
Like literally again this morning. Like, like I just don't know when it's gonna end. You know what I mean? Like I'm still like having conversations with like different people in my world. I'm like, oh, well, I could have done better there. There's still more to do. Okay, like some of the stuff that I originally started with, I think is a little bit more smooth over the years, but then it's like every day I'm just like, okay, another relationship thing to kind of unpack and still learn from, right?
It's a long and winding road is what I'm recognizing, and that I thought at first maybe relationship anarchy was like an on-ramp to something, just
Mm.
like, oh yeah, it's an on-ramp to like a more liberated lifestyle. And I was like, oh no, I'm literally going to be putting like a plug in the leak of my massive ship of struggle bus or whatever. I'm just gonna
Sure.
keep like there's like one impact, that's like coming having water come in, but then there's like as you notice like the pressure starting to build on
Yeah.
other sides of the ship as it's sinking, you see like little holes getting poked in. You're like,
Yeah.
oh shoot, I have so much to work on.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely. I think that's why I like to call it a practice, right? It can also be an identity like anything, but I also like to use the word practice because it's something I am
mhm.
learning every day, right? And I think a lot of what I see with my clients, regardless of which relationship style you practice, is how do we hold the balance of particularly us as relationship anarchists when we're looking through this lens of where can I grow, where can I expand, how can I work through the systems of oppression that are constantly in our relationships. That is a continual reflection, like we're saying. And also in that, how do we celebrate all the growth we have already done? Because sometimes we keep like looking up on the climb of like, oh shit, there's still so much more. And we forget like how far off the ground we've already come, you know? And so
Yeah,
it's like that balance of the yes and as you continue this. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, no, and that's it's like healing itself is like such a complex process. And I'm reading Liberated to the Bone by Susan Raffo right now. And the first step is like often to stop the violence because you can't heal unless the violence has been stopped.
Mhm.
And violence is coming from all directions all the time. So like how do you come to terms with that while also not denying like pleasure and
Right.
joy and the scariness of change and knowing that like potentially on the other side there is some healing to be had, even if it isn't that deep soulful healing that like our society like desperately needs.
Yeah, it feels like a deep yes and, right? Like a
Mm-hmm.
deep yes and of like, I see the climb and I'm off the ground and we'll keep going. And hopefully in the process, you know, the like building any muscle, right? It's uncomfortable when you're lifting the weight. And quite literally, that practice of building muscle, like, you know, is physiologically ripping apart the muscle first so that it comes back stronger, right? So I think a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of that sort of perspective of, ooh, I can feel this stretch happening and it is a little uncomfortable, but I know that the pleasure is there and that we'll continually need to move our bodies, right? As we age, as we move towards that, right? We'll continually do that sort of yes and to it all, probably.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a great way to put it. And it's getting me to even to think a lot about like even what I just said, which
Mm.
is the continual the
I
continual growth
know.
process.
Yeah. And it's hard because a lot of this stuff feels unconscious until it is, you know what I mean? And you're just
Hmm.
kind of like, you're feeling like, I'm doing my best. I know so much. And then like a new little light bulb goes off and you're like, oh no. And for me, hi fat cat. And for me, that's been the beauty of like community, to be able to have community that often, you know, like we're stuck in our own lens. And so to be able to have someone else see the other parts of us and like gently point them out, whether that's a therapist, a family member, a friend, right? It's really just having a different perspective to like see some of those blinder spots that often like we can't even see in ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Community like is such a huge part of relationship anarchy. I feel
Sure.
like because you can only do so much healing on your own or internal healing because practicing relationship anarchy requires you to engage with community and to engage with other people to understand like the larger structure of things, which feels like weird and new agey to say it that way, but that's kind of like not to make it sound that way, but yeah, I like that part of relationship anarchy. It's not just me and this one other person, and we're just like in our own little fantasy world, like living in the honeymoon forever and having children. It's
Mhm.
and continuing that cycle. It's messy and complex and also pleasurable in many ways.
Sure. Yeah. Like at the heart of it is understanding interconnectedness, that we are
Mm-hmm.
all interconnected to different spaces, but at bare minimum, we all live on the same planet, right? Like we all live on the same planet, and all of our collective small choices are having a collective large impact, right? Like at minimum, we can start with that one, which you know, you were talking about plants and other things. I think even that aspect of relationship anarchy is important. Like, what's our connection to the earth, this thing that we all
Yeah.
share collectively, right? And of course, then we can get
Mm-hmm.
even smaller into like smaller groups and groups and groups and groups into that. And for me, it is that understanding, or again, that practice of trying to understand of like, how can I move through this with that sort of lens of interconnectedness and mutual aid and community care. And I think that's also where like people who practice sexual fidelity are absolutely a part of this group. It's not like you have to be having sex with
Mm-hmm.
multiple people. It's about do you have this perspective to community and what it means to deconstruct the power structures that are absolutely in the way of our interconnectedness? If you're here, you're here. I don't care who you're fucking, right? Like that is not the most important part of it. I have fun fucking lots of people, but it doesn't have to be your joy, right? Like
Exactly.
yeah.
It's so wild. It's so wild to me that like we denied ourselves this chance for interconnectedness for so long. And I won't lie, like practicing relationship anarchy like has reopened a very spiritual door for me that had been closed for so long, because suddenly I was like sitting with plants, because I'm in herbalism school right now. So
Cool.
I've been like sitting with plants, and one of our practices is to meditate with the plants. And like when we take from them, we say, okay, what do you need? And oftentimes you have to sit and you have to wait for the answer. But like if I didn't have a relationship with them, or wasn't trying to have a relationship with them, then I wouldn't be doing stuff like that. And it translates to people too. So
absolutely. Yeah, that reciprocity is what I'm hearing, right? Slowing down to have that reciprocity.
Yeah, no need to go at blinding speed all the time.
Yes. Which, thinking about the next question, how do you practice relationship anarchy? I would love to hear a little bit more. You know, you're already giving us some examples of slowing down to being with the plants that you are taking from and asking, you know, what are some other ways that relationship anarchy is practiced for you?
Yeah, I mentioned at one point, like the Dean Spade episode with you, that best encompasses like actually how I practice in real life, because I don't really believe in romance in the typical myth standpoint. I often have run into situations, even this kind of like touches on difficulties a little bit, but like run into situations with previous people in my life where they talk about really romantic things. And I'm like, I will do this romantic thing with you that is romantic by definition, but I would also do it with people who might have been classified as like platonic people in my life. And so the platonic and romantic, and I put quotes around both of those, like often just blend for me. And as a result, the sexual and like more physically intimate parts that come into my life when I practice tend to be just like one of the many ways that I might express affection and care for somebody in my community. You know, like I might have sex with somebody that I'm never going to live with. And I might never have sex with someone that like I want to spend the rest of my life with.
Right.
You know, in terms of like, you know, building community, like living on the same land, or, you know, the typical like rural queer dream of just like living on a commune or whatever, you
classic.
know. Classic. Yeah. So that's like often how I practice it. And yeah, it's moving at the speed of trust. And knowing that like I say I love you to people who I would consider platonic friends, or what would be canonically considered platonic friends. And I haven't said I love you to some people that I date, because I haven't known them as long as people who I've been in relationship with on what is considered a platonic level. So yeah, that's like kind of a lens into how.
Sure. Beautiful. Yeah. I'd love to hear more about moving at the speed of trust.
Yeah, so that's a phrase that a friend of mine, someone who's very dear to me, said at one point, because in the classic queer fashion, we met immediately, we're like, yeah, we have crushes on each other. Or just like there was like this weird like energy, and we couldn't quite figure out what it was. And so the first thing we did was like, okay, cool, we'll just go on a date. And then we went on a couple of dates, and the two of us were like, like this is not unlike. And that was more for me, because like I'm a hilariously like I come off as like super practical looking, and just like I like know what I'm doing, and then when it comes to the situation, I'm like an absolute klutz, and like kind of a dunce cap. So we both stepped back, and we're like, okay, well, we need to slow down, recognize what's happening here. And that's when they use the phrase speed of trust. And now they're somebody who's been in my life for almost 2 years now, and we grow together in a way that like we say I love you to each other we don't like have sex, we don't sleep together, we
Yeah.
don't like spend time in that way. They have multiple partners, but like we do know that there is love and care for each other there.
Yeah.
And that was because we slowed down and let
Sure.
trust like take the wheel and have that build. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's like the best explanation I think I have for that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I find, through doing my dissertation on relationship anarchy, I wrote about the ways that, of course, anything can be messy, but in the most ideal context of relationship anarchy, it takes significant communication skills, significant insight, and like really relational skills to navigate this. And I think that's what I'm hearing, right? Is this space of, wow, there is some energy between the two of us. We don't really know exactly what that means. And I love that space, holding that space for that, because I think that's often what I hear of people, particularly in this world, is I met someone, I don't know what it means. There's some excitement, I'm not sure yet, right? And so we're all trying to like figure it out, but what does it mean to actually just take a step back? I'm not sure yet. We're living into it, right? And then the
Yeah.
ability to communicate with each other in such a way that we don't have certain expectations of this is what it means for us to be a meaningful relationship, and rather to collaboratively discuss that together and be in that flow state of change and that takes high levels of insight and communication. Okay.
Yeah,
Right,
it's
like
so
high
hard.
levels. Yeah, you want to say more to that?
Yeah, just because like we're taught to move so fast all the time and to be in this go, 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 girl world. And like admittedly, like back in 2021, I had from like at least a professional standpoint, and this was like also something that radically shifted me, is like I had a mental breakdown. I was
Mm,
working like a really, 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 really intense job through the pandemic, did really well, got promoted a bunch of times, and then crashed and burned. And I was like, shoot, one, why did I crash and burn? There were multiple reasons for that. And then
mm,
two, I was like, what is up with the speed? Why do we need to go this fast? And like trying to remind myself in other facets of my life that like speed does not necessarily equal quality or like,
sure.
levels of success, or there's no, it's like, it's not, in fact, it might even be inversely proportional and not directly proportional.
Hmm.
So, um, yeah, that's
Yeah.
primarily.
It's so hard though. I think for me, I find myself wanting security often. I do feel like
Mhm.
the deeper I get into more interconnected community, the more security I feel in myself and in my community. But I want security so deeply. I'm like, where? Who is the person that's going to ride all of the years with me? Like, stay, clamp, stay. And I think part of that too is reflecting on the ways that, particularly as a queer person, as someone who steps so deeply into this, there is a pretty deep disconnect between my biological family and myself. We do communicate, but there are ways where they cannot see me, they cannot understand, and they cannot support me. And so, what that means is I am left without community and trying to find people that are going to ride with me. And so, I've always kind of held that of how that disconnect from my biological family has created a paradigm where I think I grasp much harder onto, particularly in the past romantic relationships and a solo one, right? Where now I'm trying
Mm.
to like find more sources of water to have into my life so that I can have a deeper trust both with myself and with the longevity of the community that I've built. And then therefore not fall so deeply into the psychedelic trip that is NRE, but like, man, new relationship energy feels good. you
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
uh, it's
Yeah,
hard.
because like as you said, like we're taught that like, and I mean, I come from a family where like I'm not like that far removed. Like I know all the people who immigrated here. Like
Mm,
I watched in real time and the end of white assimilation. At the time, a lot of the people who came over weren't considered white and were bigoted against in like some really awful ways. So they hard turned and assimilated themselves and came obviously with that the anger, the grief, the abuse, all of that that kind of flows into the decision to be white and to be seen as white. And I feel like in that process, there was also the theme of like blood is thicker than water. Your family is
mm,
your only thing. Your family is here. Your family is here. And like most people of Mediterranean descent, as myself, like we're taught very
Mhm.
early on, like, this is the only way. You're going to have children. You're going to like continue for
Right.
us. There's no other thing than family. And when I got out of my family's like clutches, if you will, because I still obviously communicate with them similar to you,
Sure.
but when I got out of the clutch, I was like, but this person feels really comfortable and safe to me. Why can't I love them in the same way? And also, like, what is love actually? And also, it's just excited to ask all these questions.
Sure.
And so, yeah, I think you bring up a good point of like, we're hardwired for security in a lot of ways, and security is great, but it's like not, unfortunately, in this world right now, not guaranteed. And
Mhm.
like making peace with that, and also recognizing that people can offer you security still too, and you can also find security in yourself, which is also something we're not taught.
Right.
So I don't know, there's like a whole
Sure.
rabbit
Yeah.
hole there.
Right, right, right. And the only constant is change. I
Exactly,
just
yeah.
like always, I'm like, fuck, God. You know what I mean? Just when you think you figured it out, it's like, here's a new thing. Here we go. And again, there is some level of things getting more and more smooth over time, I think, in terms of security. But the only thing that is inevitable is change, right? Like, even if you have a relationship that is going to ride with you all the way through to the end of your life, you're going to go through different evolutions of, I fucking hope so, right? Like, I hope you change I hope you keep learning, right? Like, could you imagine being the same, like, Jesus, so like,
Yeah.
I hope, right? So no matter what, it's just, yeah, it's hard. And so I think that's a lot of the security piece. And I'm remembering the conversation with David Cooley, who was Jessica Fern's life partner and had written another book, or a part of Polywise. And he was talking about how it's important to see someone in conflict before you have that level of building the security, right? Like, have you
Hmm.
had a difficult disagreement with this person to really see how they hold that space? And I was really touched by that conversation, and it really changed how I looked at relationships. I'm still learning to look at it through that lens of like, okay, how can I withhold my desire to like U-Haul right now in a very clear way, um and wait until we've been in some point of conflict, and then been like, okay, like, how do we mend this? How do we move forward? Is this someone that has the like skills and the relational insight to be able to be someone that I actually want to navigate more changes with, right?
Oh, absolutely. Damn, like that's like this bit that's been like this current relationship that I'm in right now. I met somebody who is like already very dear to me, but like the two of us are very like, okay, we cannot jump into this because both of us have had histories of jumping into things. And we're like, okay, so things we need to do before we understand like where we're at. Like we need to travel together.
Yeah.
We need to like be in a stressful situation together, which
Mm-hmm.
often like can be looped into travel. We need
Yep.
to like
Yep.
help each other through something that's like a grief process. Like we need to, and like when both of us have mental health issues, like how are we showing up for each other? How are other people in our lives showing up for us? How are we handling like people coming into each other's lives that like, we already might have like root intimacy with because we've like been with that person longer or might have known that person longer, even if it isn't in the same way, because all
Mm-hmm.
relationships are different, all connections are different
Yep.
fundamentally. So
Yep.
like, yeah, that's all so important before like
Mm-hmm.
jumping in and seeing if this person is going to be like, I don't like to use the phrase ride or die, but like, someone who you can like ride in the car with for long
Yeah.
hours at a
Right.
time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I think the ways that our minds are always creating narratives of the story of who we are and who we're connecting with. Right. And so when we meet someone new, it's almost like a black box where we get to project all of our favorite narratives onto who that could be. Right. And then you
Hmm.
either get like pieces along the way that either like, meet that narrative, reconstruct that narrative, and then trying to have this like very, of course, live the life, live the pleasure, have fun, but also a little bit of diligence to notice like, okay, here's the narrative I'm telling myself. Is this actually reality? Or am I just
Yeah.
like sucked in some sort of like rose colored glasses of what's going on, and trying to like, when people tell you this is where I'm at, not going, oh, that's okay, I'll help them get somewhere else. I'd be like, no, like, this is where they're at. This is what they said. Take it at face value. Like, damn, that's
Yeah.
a hard one for me. I'm always like, I can help. Don't worry.
Yeah,
I
me too. I'm such a
can help.
my sister always says I dated projects. Like I dated like people
Yeah.
who needed to like have a fixer uppers basically. They would be like, oh yeah, like I need this. They're like a hot mess in some way. And I'm like, and I would take it on and be like, okay, it's my hot mess now. Let's go.
Right.
And then be
Right.
like, okay, wait, no, I'm a hot mess too. They're a hot mess. Their problems are not my problems. I gotta focus on like whatever the fuck my brain is doing, and other things
Yes,
that are going on in my life that are chaos. And
for
they have to
sure.
figure themselves out and like figure out what they can ask me for help for, and vice versa. And
For
yeah, I can't
sure.
take on everybody else's issues, kind of
For
thing.
sure. Especially as a therapist, I think I struggle with that because I'm like, I can help. I can do
I'm also in the
this.
mental
Yeah.
health facility. That's how
Yeah.
I get paid to do like peer support stuff.
Cool. Yeah.
So like yeah, oftentimes people come to me like, fix me, and I'm like, that's
Not what I do,
okay.
first off. But
Yeah.
somehow when I'm dating, I'm like, I can do that. It's like, damn it, Nicole, not again. At least I'm getting to a point as of today. I think I'm getting to a point you're like asking like when that point of like waking up or whatever it is, it's like still happening today. I'm like journaling today. Like, okay, we can't fix people, like accept where they're at. And what I was what I was telling myself was like, okay, how can I listen to the my somatic response? How can I listen to my energetic response? When I was studying in like feminist psychology, they would talk about relationships, good relationships, having 5 good things. And I forget what all 5 of them are, but one of my favorite ones is zest, this energy for
Mhm.
life. And so, how can I watch? Because in those dynamics where I am thinking, like, oh, I can help this person change, like they're emotionally unavailable, I can do that. Like, like what ends up happening is as you live into that, like, you start to feel your energy drain. You're like, wow, like I'm kind of like I'm tired. Like we're having these long conversations, and I'm like still damn, And so, how can I be in tune with okay? These relationships over here are bringing me that life, and I'm feeling good, and I'm feeling seen, and all of this. And then rather than saying something's wrong with me, which of course I don't want to say that we're always going to look at our other relationships, we do have to look at ourselves and be like, what's going on with ourselves? But also, like, particularly depending on your identity, some of us tend to do that more than others, right? Like, it's not always us, it can be the dynamics around you. And so to be a little bit critical about that and say, okay, this dynamic is actually bringing parts of myself out that I don't often see. It is draining me. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean we're going to cut them out of our lives. There obviously is a point where if someone is harming you, that is, you have
Mhm.
to protect yourself. But the rest of it, it's like thinking about it like a metaphor of the sun, right? Like when the sun's too close, it burns everything. When it's too far, it's cold. So like where is the right spot for
The
in our
Goldilocks zone.
ecosystem totally for this person?
Yeah, yeah. And that's such a hard thing to try to figure out.
Yes.
Like, I don't know about you, but when I'm finding that someone really wants to attach to me, like really attach, like be really, 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 really like needy, needy, needy. And I say needy not necessarily in like the negative connotation, because whenever I hear that word, it makes me kind of like, crunch up a little
Yeah.
bit inside. I'm using it as in like they just like really feel magnetized and like want some of your energy because they might, be lacking that in some way or like blocked off from their own energy in some way. Like I immediately put up my own shields. I'm like, you out here, like, and that's something that I know I'm working on because like seeing that attachment or that desire for attachment, like again, I'm like kind of going into difficulties in some ways. Like again, but like
Sure.
I find that I have my giant like stone wall that I generally put in front of
Mm,
people who like are, really into feeling that energy of like
sure.
lovingness. And I'm like, okay, like you need to be like out here like a little bit before I can like let you in
Sure.
slowly.
Sure.
Which can be disarming for some people.
Totally.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Right. And I'm often the opposite, right? Like if we have a leaning of like anxious or avoidant, like, right, like I'm definitely the opposite. And we're like, hey, and
I
it's
also
like,
think it's person dependent too.
oh,
Like
yes.
sometimes like I find someone so cool and I'm like, love me.
Yes.
And then like other times I'm just like, I'm too cool for you. What are you talking about? And then inside
Totally.
I'm like freaking out. Um
Yes. I think that's part of the discussion of attachment that needs to be updated is like, hey, it's not inherent to you. You might have a tendency. I might have a love language I prefer, but I do all
mhm.
5, right? And I have
Yeah.
all of the anxious, avoidant, insecure. Like the whole thing is up in there. It depends on who it is. And so holding more of that, like and that goes back to that other part of the energy and the situation, right? Is it's like it's going to bring out different parts of you depending on different people. And so it's not necessarily always definitively you as much as it might be the dynamics. And then we can obviously pull that out to a larger discussion of like selfhood, of this very Western concept of selfhood that could be deconstructed into a wow, you're always interconnected. So even this concept of self I have right now is a reflection of all of my relationships, probably the 5 closest to me, right? And then like out from there and all of that, right? So it's never this point of like individuality, but the yes and of like addressing the relationships and yourself in that dance of the interconnectedness.
Yeah, it's so, yeah, it constantly blows my mind. Like, you think it's going to be like a black and white scenario. Like, I studied math in college. So like, I've been like, oh yeah, like everything has an answer that I can just circle at the end, which in reality, that's like just not how this works. So that's like kind of a concept I'm learning too.
Totally. Yeah. I wrote a guide on jealousy that I'll be publishing on my website. And I'm like, I can't give people like an A plus B plus C equals blank, because that is literally the least reality of everything that we're talking about. The best thing I can do is give people really good questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's some questions. Just like think about it for yourself. Here's some
Seeds
more
planted,
questions.
just leave it there.
Yeah, just think. I don't have the answers because this is way too complex of a math question, you know?
Yeah.
And I think even like that act of taking space from someone who does reach out really hard for attachment, in some ways that makes sense, right? Because I think that we do the same thing, whether it's in sexual, romantic, question mark, how do we define that, right? Relationships. I always get locked in where like I'm trying to like talk about things. And so it's helpful to say the word that I don't actually believe in the strict box of, but in those paradigms, you know, we have like we can experience people who try to build attachment really quickly. And I think in friendship, we feel the same way. Like when someone reaches out and is like, I want to talk to you constantly. Hey, how are you doing? Like every day, you're like, hey, like, don't you have community too? Like what is going on that you don't have other like, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it
Yeah.
kind of makes sense that we'd have a little bit of a skepticalness of someone who does that so strongly, because it's maybe indicative of not having a full community of people that are also supporting them. So their need for water, right, in the desert makes sense to be like, I'm so thirsty, right? But it's also like, whoa, okay, I'm kind of concerned that I am now only going to be your only source of water. That does not seem like a healthy dynamic.
Oh, absolutely. And that's like something that like, at least historically, like people that I've attracted to me, like I come in and I'm just like, like, you know, being all like distracted and whatever, and like energetic bouncy ball. People who usually are like, I've historically attracted have been people who've been like, I don't have community. Whoop.
Yeah.
And so now I've like started like recognizing that pattern, at least in myself, and have been saying like, okay, how can I gently help this person, not even help this person, that's the wrong word, but like how can I gently demonstrate to this person potentially that like community is like such a lovely and bubbly thing, and like help them, I keep using the word help, like sorry, like can't think of another word, but like help guide them towards like ways to like, you know, start putting their roots into other places, and like, you know, getting that nourishment and getting that water, and like obviously still like having their roots system, like you know, getting water from me too if they desire to, still once they've like, you know, poked their heads out and like kind of saw some other things. But yeah, that's something that like, that's like a conversation that I've like only recently started to have with people that I connect with, where I notice that pattern. But before I would just be like, yeah, of course I'll fulfill all your needs. Like I'm a people pleaser. That's what I love to do. Socialized as a woman, you know, I was like told that everybody's needs are now my needs too, or like my desire to solve.
I feel it one. Yes. That's usually where I say, oh, I climb on Sundays. I climb on Sundays in the morning. If you want to come join, you know, like, hey, I've got a community here. Like, let's climb. Like, this is what I do, you know? So like finding the spaces where we can have community that we can invite people to, which like I'm feeling some like, ooh, like church. That's what people like it like do, right? Like in an ideal world where we don't have this like patriarchal problematic concept of religion, right? It's more like, hey, like come join my community. Let's be together and support each other, right? So I see a lot of that connection.
Yeah, I have like a group of people I do herb brunch with. So like we talk about herbs during brunch, and it's like not religious at all.
Come join the herb brunch, right? Come join the climbing. Like we've got the spaces, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the next question is, why do you practice relationship anarchy?
Yeah. So I kind of touched on this earlier, but too, like I started because I was hurting and confused, and
Yeah.
relationship anarchy kind of just like swooped in and was like, oh yes, like here's a way for you to explore all of this in a way that is like also very liberating. And so politically, I had already been there. I was already like, okay, like fuck this system. We need universal health care. Like
Yeah.
also like why do we have a president? Like seems kind of arbitrary. Like he's not doing anything anyway. And going through like all of those processes as well. But then I found that, wow, okay, everything hurts actually.
Yeah.
And my body is carrying generations of pain and grief, of violence, of assimilation, of like, violence that like, white people have done across generations in this country. Like I was carrying a lot of pain in other places that had nothing to do with relationship anarchy, but I realized that relationship anarchy was like becoming like a vehicle for me to like keep asking myself those questions and keep returning to being like,
Mhm.
whoa, shit, like there's a lot of stuff stored in this body that needs to be released. There's a lot of stuff stored collectively in these communities that needs to be released. And
Right.
again, it's like a vehicle. And it's just one way for me to like look at all of it and kind of hold it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, absolutely. Because all of that gets in our way of loving connection.
yeah, exactly. Like you can't love somebody. I identified as asexual for a really long time because like I just couldn't like for multiple reasons couldn't like for one point like couldn't accept my queerness. Like I couldn't accept
Mm,
that. Like it was just like a huge like moment of
sure.
realizing that this is like how I was gonna have to live and exist. So
Right, right, right. Relationship to self, right? So, how do we examine the power structures that have impacted our relationship to self?
mm-hmm,
Right. And then
mm-hmm,
the ways that then, yeah, you're talking about the realities of living into that in community, right? So then relationships with community. And then, yeah, where do we draw the line of what our community is, right? Again, we think about climate change, right? Like, oh, okay,
yeah.
oh shit, okay, okay, okay. So, like,
And
where
that
do
big
we draw
looming
the
specter out
line,
in the
right?
horizon that's coming closer.
Yeah, right, exactly. Future generations, right, that are going to live
Yes.
because, like, oh, fun fact, I'm gonna die, you're gonna die, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, so like, what is my responsibility as a community member, right, on all these different levels?
Yeah.
A practice. That is what I know is just a practice of humility, right? When people call you out for stuff and then being like, okay, I am learning.
Yeah.
I am learning how to better do this every single day. But I equally feel connected to that reason of it's hard, like you said at the very beginning, of people who don't know what relationship anarchy means to get to this level of the point of the conversation when you're like, I just don't know where relationship anarchy ends.
Yeah.
you
It's
know
everywhere.
right? Because they're like, what do you mean, what is it? And I'm like, well, I just it's ever, I don't know how to like now put it back into a smaller box.
And do you think that your reasons for why have just like evolved and
Oh,
changed because of all this work that you like find yourself doing? You're suddenly like, oh, well, now I'm practicing it because not only because of these reasons that I started out, but like now there's like so much more nuance in the way that I'm like looking at the world. And now I'm like finding myself having new whys to add to the list or to change even.
yeah, yeah, yes, absolutely, all caps, absolutely, yes. Right. I think when I first heard of it, it was through like it wasn't through the political anarchy route, it was definitely through the route of non-monogamy and learning about relationships and learning about the problems with hierarchy and how that can hurt people
Mhm.
and community. And then so feeling very drawn to this world of these deeper, analyses of how do we do this better. And then when you start living into that, though, it's like, whoa, okay, what does that actually look like? got it, confused, learning, right? And then so, yeah, doing my dissertation where I interviewed very similar to this relationship anarchist, and then having the podcast space where I get to talk to people like you and have these different perspectives and being in connection with relationship anarchists in my community. Yeah, it has absolutely continually changed what it means for me to be in this space, right? And so,
Yeah.
yes, I'm very excited too, because when I think about the longevity of that, of okay, like this is where I'm running right now. I can't even imagine in 10 years' time, like with this level of dedication to community, with this level of dedication to self-reflection and our interconnectedness. I feel excited. I feel like I'm going to be even cooler than I am right now, you know?
Yeah, I can't wait to grow old in some ways. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna be like this like chill little hobbit person who just like smokes weed all the time and like has conversations with people about this and like is constantly learning still, just still learning, still growing. And like that's like something that I think I admire about some of the elders in my life is that like I know somebody who's 87 and was like I'm a street medic, so I was like helping teach like people how to use water bottles to like spray tear gas out of people's eyes.
Sure.
And she was just like, yeah. And I was like in like the 1960s, like riots against da 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 da. And she goes off about it. And I'm like, and here you are, like sitting here with like a twerp like me,
Mm,
like with a squeezy bottle, like learning how to squirt things out of people's eyes where you probably were doing it before and like didn't
yeah.
have like you just did it because like you knew what to do. And like it's so people like that just like are still learning, still like
Mm,
communicating, still like and she's out there tabling for like abolition and other things like that. And I'm just like, damn, like
yeah.
people are still learning up until almost their like 10th decade. Like, what
Right.
is happening?
Absolutely. And that's where I start to feel a little bit of jealousy where I'm like, God, I wish that was my like grandmother. Like, damn,
Me
like I can't even imagine how cool I would have been if that was like where I started. I'm like, damn, I had to climb a lot more than woo,
too. Yeah.
like but
Yeah.
yeah, like seeing that interconnectedness, the journey, or even like something as simple as like carrying Narcan at a festival, right? Like, hey, like this is my community. We're all at a concert here. Like, I'm not taking Molly tonight, but what does it mean to be able to have that for the person who does and has that fentanyl
Yeah.
overdose? Like, that's my community. Like, that feels like relationship anarchy to me. And then it definitely feels like relationship anarchy to me when you get stopped through the metal detector and they're like, what is this? I'm like, fuck, like I'm
Yeah.
just trying to keep
Absolutely.
someone safe tonight. Like, oh, it's like, damn.
Yeah, damn. And like that just reminds me of like stories like because of the work that I do, like I'm working with like the unhoused community and someone wanted to get clean. And this guy like said to her as I was bringing her to the ER to go to the place to like start the process of getting clean. He said to me, "You can't carry this bag in here." And I said, "Oh, well, she doesn't have a house." He's like, "I don't care. She can't have
Mm,
this bag." So I like
wow.
dumped all the immediate things out of the bag, started shoving them into my pockets, shoved them into her pockets, folded up the bag, put it into my back pocket, and just walked through and was like,
Wow.
"Not carrying anything. What are you gonna do about it?" And he just stared at me, and I was like, "Bye." But
Oof.
like as a result, though, like I would not like if this were me earlier in life, like I would have just been like, "Okay, yeah, you're right, sorry, sir," and like kind of
Yeah.
shuffled out, carrying the bag of like her entire livelihood, and just being like,
Right.
"Well, might not see her again, so like
Right.
hopefully she's got gum, hopefully she's got other
Right.
things." But
Right.
like now I'm like at a point where I'm just like, okay, actually, fuck you. I'm gonna figure out a
Yeah.
way around this because this person like has the fundamental right to live and have access to her
Right.
belongings.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I don't know,
Right.
stuff like that.
Absolutely. Practicing love, right?
Exactly.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. It's
This
good.
is all love and like it's just expressed in different ways.
Yep. That's why I really like the idea of practicing love as a book title for it. I haven't gotten to the point yet of writing it all out, but I see the vision in my head. And so it's coming together. And that kind of leads us into our next question, which is how does relationship anarchy impact your practice of intimacy?
Yeah, no, this was a hard question. This was a hard question for me to answer because I feel like I'm still
Mm,
learning because I have a lot of blocks. around intimacy. I feel
Sure.
like, especially like physical intimacy.
Mm,
I've gotten to the point where like I allow hugs now, but like as a kid, like I was forced, to like
that's hard.
kiss the aunts and
Uh,
like, give hugs to the uncles. And like
yeah.
my great grandmother with her like, really smelly lipstick would come in and pucker up and like, kiss me on the head and stuff like that. And things that like I was told that I needed to give, like
Right.
that was like
Right.
not mine to give.
Right.
So shit like that, like I'm still working on where I'm like, okay, yeah, I can be like loose and happy when I'm having sex, which like, I've come a long way. And I think part of it was like transness, but like
Mm-hmm.
that was something how much like I shy away from like just generally like these wounds and these traumas. And relationship anarchy is like having me like look at them in the face and be like, yeah, that was fucked up. You should have been allowed to say like, no, I don't feel like kissing my great grandmother today. Like I'll do it when I feel ready, or I'll do it
Yep.
when it feels right.
Yep.
And you know what? It's mine to sit with if she dies before I'm ready for that. But that was something that it was just like, again, like culturally, like
Mm-hmm.
these people deserve your affection, and you don't have a choice in giving it. I think in that way it's been a struggle, but like intimacy in other ways, like again, like risking like getting tackled by security at like the
Right.
ER, like and just shoving things into my pockets. I'm like, you know what, fuck you. What are you actually gonna do to me?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like I care about this person. Like she's gonna die on the street if you don't let me in with her right now, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so like that kind of intimacy, like I've just been like suddenly, that's, I shouldn't say suddenly, it's taken years of just to be like, you know what, this is what's gonna happen. Like we're gonna
Yeah.
tough it out. We're gonna
Yeah.
push through and we're gonna do it. And like care for these people radically and deeply, even if
Mm-hmm.
like I might not see them again, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's like totally like made my friendships like so much deeper in a way that
Right.
like, yeah, like you probably recognize this too, like the possibilities like now of intimacy are endless. I could like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we could have sex with our friends, or we could just be like the type of person who just like goes on trips together, or just
Yeah.
plants a garden. There's like so
Right.
many options that like we
Yeah.
don't have to feel shamed for anymore. um
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The expansiveness of intimacy, right? Like feeling
yeah.
into the intimacy that is maybe even deeper than sexual intimacy, right? And being able
Yeah.
to find out, what works for the relationships that you're in and the unique relationships. Each one's going to be different, and feeling into that rather than a mode of, okay, if we do this thing, that means we're at this level of importance, right? That level of deconstruction feels like it's brought so much saturation of color to my life, right? Where you're just
Hmm.
like, wow, I feel more of this, that sure, this is a human being that is connecting with me, not just a friend. This is a
Yeah.
human being that is connecting and sharing. I like to not use words like spending,
Yeah,
capitalism,
sure.
sharing
Yeah.
time with me, sharing. I watched that. I literally crossed it out in my journal this morning. I was like, not spending, damn it, sharing.
I do that all the
Sharing.
time. Like invest in friendships. I'm
I
like, what am I
know.
investing in? Like, why? How can I
Yeah.
say like planting or like
Right.
cultivating friendships?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's the same.
Exactly. Right. And so I'm hearing that, yeah, again, acknowledging the power structures, the past dynamics in family where it was, this is your expectation, is that you're going to give your body to your family, which is like pinning me into my like Christian background of you're going to give your body to your husband, right? And how all of these sort, I know, oof,
Ugh.
oof, and so like unlearning that. And again, this is where I say very clearly, for me, monogamy created that same paradigm because I was the only space where we had made this commitment of giving sex to each other, which meant, sure, my partner could go masturbate if they needed that sexual experience, which in some cultures, right, is not okay. And when I was Christian, that wouldn't have been okay. But outside of that context, they could do that. But beyond that, I was the person who was supposed to be the source of this experience. So then that meant if I don't want it, I'm kind of letting the
Letting this other person
messiness of that,
down.
fuck. And I had no idea what kind of weight that felt like until I was in a space with multiple people and I said, I don't want to have that type of sex. Go have it with somebody else. I don't want to have sex at all. go have that with somebody else, and then still be in loving, deep connection and not have to be fearful that because we're not doing this thing, that means I'm not meaningful, that I'm not this or that to this. Oh my God.
Yeah.
What a psychedelic trip I didn't even know I was
Yeah.
having, until you got there and you're like, oh God, oh, whoa. Wow. Shit.
Yeah, it was wild, honestly. And like for myself, like I know that like, sexual intimacy has definitely like, changed and become something like way more beautiful than like a task. Like at one point I was like, yeah, I have to do this because like again, like monogamous, like it didn't even occur to me to be like, yeah, go masturbate, have fun, like
Sure.
here's my toy, enjoy yourself.
Right.
Like I'm gonna go and like color, enjoy. But like now, like to be able to just be like, yeah, go off, have fun. I'm gonna like, well, I'll still love you, and I'll still like, sleep next to you at night, and like we can have sleepovers and pancakes for dinner and all this other fun stuff that's like, deep and connecting in its own right. But yeah, it's the freedom to do what you want with your body, which like is something I think I'm still like in shock about, to be like, yeah, my body's to do what I want to do with it. And so is like the other people around me, like they're humans with their bodies and they can do what they want, their bodies as well.
Sure.
As long as there's like, obviously like, consent and understanding that like harm can happen and, the structure is set up to prevent said things from like, escalating to a point where like it's no longer like pleasurable to anybody or safe. But like, and that's like my inner like little street meta coming out and being like, remember safety. But like it's also true though, like, people can take total advantage of this. Like I've seen it happen, like, and I'm sure you have too. It's like, yeah, I hate to like, pigeonhole it, but it's usually the cis white dudes who are like, I'm just doing this so I can like lay with as many people as I want and have no accountability whatsoever. And it's like, okay, anarchy is like the responsibility of choice. Like that's literally what anarchy is, at least according to Ursula K. Le Guin. So like you're choosing to do something, and therefore you also have the accountability on the other side.
Right. Community self-governance. It's like all about the interconnectedness. So that's where I think I appreciate this distinction of, we don't have to draw rules of who is and who isn't here, right? Because that's, who are we to say that? But if there's any part that would say you're here or you're not here, it's community. And if you're not on board with community, I might say you belong under libertarianism, and that's okay. And I can say that. That's okay, right? Like that's okay.
Yeah.
I just don't want to be the
like,
person
you can go and do your thing. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like I always say to people, like, hey, if you want to like fuck around and do what you want and have it be like on your own terms and do your own thing, that's relationship libertarianism, and I am so happy for you. I don't want to be a part of it. Right. Like I'm happy to be like, friendly to you and like, kind to you, but I'm not engaging with that kind of relationship structure or relationship practice.
Right. Yes.
So.
kind way of doing that. And I think I've talked on like past relationship anarchist conversations about, language is only so helpful as it is helpful for us, right? And so we are constantly in a space of developing new language. And so a lot of people who say, oh, I can practice monogamy and relationship anarchy. It's like, yes. And also, what if we got to a new space of language, right? Because the idea of monogamy, that word inherently means one person for life. Very few of us in our current cultural context, there are people who do that, but very few of us are practicing one sexual person for life. What does it mean when you do watch porn? What does it mean? Does that count? I don't know.
Yeah, because those are people on the other side.
Right. These are all deep questions, but everyone gets to decide for their own journey, right? And so then I was talking about this space of, what about sexual fidelity and sexual self-governance, right? So the idea of, okay, like I could have a act of fidelity with one person, or I could be in a throuple and we're close, right? Something that could kind of connotate what we're talking about here of having sexual fidelity, right? And that practice versus self-governance. And the more I sat with it, I was like, so you might hear me when I say self-governance as a community self-governance, but
absolutely.
I also am worried that, like you're saying, the people who take it in a certain way would be like, oh, I'm a relationship anarchist practicing self-governance. Fuck you, I don't gotta use a condom. Like I'd be like, oh no, you know, so it's like, I feel like I need to say now, like in more like community self-governance, like, you know, like,
Yeah.
which is what we sometimes use in the anarchist like philosophy, right? So maybe that's like it's sexual fidelity or community self-governance, right? Of like, hey, understand that your actions have consequences for the whole community, right? Because I am afraid of someone running with that and being like, I practice self-governance sexually, get out of here. And I'm like, oh no, what did I give them? You know, like
Like the person who like makes up new rules to like a board game that everybody's like consented to play together, and they're like,
shit.
well, I've decided that the red pieces mean that I get double the points, but you don't get double the points when you get the red pieces, so ha 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 ha. But that's what self-governance is. And you're just like, no, 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 like we all collectively agree that if you get the red pieces, we all get double points. Okay.
Yes,
So
absolutely. And I think what
yeah.
I've lived into the pain of that, which we'll go into the difficulty. So I guess I'll share one of mine first, is just like, what level of detail do we tell the other people?
Yes. Oh my God.
Right? It's like,
That's yeah. That's something we're struggling right now. Like with the person that one of the people that I'm dating right now, like in the canonical sense of dating, we're like, what do we call each other? I was like, do I call you my girlfriend? Because like to outside, like that's what it looks like.
Sure.
We're dating and like being like cute and snuggly with each other and like very outwardly affectionate. And like I go home to your house and we sleep together and we like, spend multiple days together at a time and talk about
Mhm.
living together. Do we
Yeah.
use partner? But like we're not like partner in the way that like we're like people just assume that like we're married or like
Right.
moving towards marriage, but we're not. So we're like, what do we do? Person friend? We were trying to figure out like how do you so at work we just decided like, okay, yeah, we use the word partner, boyfriend, girlfriend interchangeably just because like people don't get that. And then
Yeah.
once we're in spaces with people who understand relationship anarchy, we're like, yeah, okay, yeah, this is like someone that's like really close to me and they're a friend of mine, and everybody
Right.
understands that the word friend like can have multiple connotations and
Right.
multiple like ways of expression.
Exactly.
So that's been hard.
Oh, sure. And hopefully fun. Like that part I think is
Yeah.
fun too, where it's like, cool, like we want to use boyfriend, girlfriend. Like, what does that mean to us? What does partner mean to us? What do any of these words mean to us? And then, yeah, trying to understand the political nature of it all. Because you're right. If I do say, oh, me and my friends are having a beach day hangout versus me and my two partners, I have now outed myself in a very different way. Right. So there is a
Mm-hmm.
political nature to this language game, you know, so like making those choices and then yeah, being able to enjoy the ride of like, hey, what does partner mean to you? And then the fun journey that is when that word means two different things to the two of you, right? Which is
Mm-hmm.
perpetual. Like, what does it mean when we have this? That's why like when I got keys to one of my partner's apartment, I like asked them like, what does it mean that I have keys to your apartment? Yeah.
Yeah, it's
And
like it's something that's changed in our relationship to have
yeah.
allowed this trust to have
Yeah.
been built.
Mm-hmm. And I find that cute. Like that's cute. Like I like that. Like tell me what it means, you know? And like they're like, I have a distrust of words. Like, can we let the jester speak? And I'm like, no, we can't actually. I want to know. I want to know.
That's so good. That's so
Yeah.
good. Yeah, it's something too that like and like not to like move it over to difficulties, but like I
Yeah, go
also
for
have
it.
found
Let's
that
do it.
that like totally is where like I find the biggest struggles coming in within relationship to other people.
Yeah.
Because I've been in relationships where like I describe my connections to others as a constellation.
Yeah, sure.
Every star is important, and without one of those stars, like a particular shape isn't formed.
Right.
And that's like, so everybody has like importance in my life. And one of the people that I was dating at the time was like, well, I hope I'm your biggest, brightest star. And I
Mm,
was like, oh shit, I don't think we've been on the same page
yeah.
about like how this is working, because like you are important to me, like you are in the constellation, and we have been like, adding you into this constellation for like the last like 6 to 8 months of our lives. Like you're so important to me.
Yeah.
And also like you're not brighter than anybody else. In fact, no one is brighter than anybody else because everybody has a role to play. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, like I have a role to play in other people's lives just as much as like
Right.
other people have a role to play in mine. And I remember being like, okay, we need to have like a sit down conversation. And then we just realized like, hey, we're actually practicing relationship anarchy very differently. And
Mm,
like that doesn't mean we can't like, be in relationship to each other. We just might have to be in relationship to each other differently.
mm-hmm.
Which ended up being like a very adult conversation because they also practice relationship
Great.
anarchy.
We love
But
that.
like it was just definitely, or like, non-monogamy, like they were realizing, I think, that like relationship anarchy as a whole might not necessarily have been for them because they wanted a
Mm-hmm.
primary partner of some kind. But
Mm-hmm.
it was definitely like one of those conversations where like, oh yeah, okay, like we need to like change our language around this and like still like respect and love each other for our differences and continue forward in
Mm-hmm.
being in community.
Right.
And that
Right.
worked out like really well.
Great. Again, let's go back to the like the dissertation finding strong communication skills and emotional insight, right? Like these are the things like, okay, this is what I thought we were doing. Great. We're on slightly different agendas here. We both still really care for each other. You're awesome. You're awesome. We're on slightly different paths. Cool.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
What a world compared
What a
to
world.
fuck
Yeah.
you out of here. Right? Like the whoa, like this
Yeah,
is a
yeah.
very different space that
Hmm.
we're in. Yeah.
Very different. And I think, yeah, I don't know if this is something that resonates with you too, but like from the outside, for people who don't practice relationship anarchy and are very like, woven into Western society's monogamous framework, I often get the vibe of that meme where you have like what my mom thinks I do, what my friends think I do, what I actually do. And it's like all the different like images
Yeah.
of like how people do things. And so it's often not correcting people because that was a very Virgo thing for me to say. I'm sorry.
Sure.
But correcting people and be like, oh, hey, like it's not always like this. Like it can be like this. And, you know, guiding them towards like a better vision. And it's usually like the confused looks of like then
Yeah.
it's the next meme of like Winona Ryder like staring off into space as like the math equations like
Sure.
blast across her face or something like
Yeah.
that.
Sure, 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 sure. Yeah, you want to hear a horror story?
Yeah, sure. I love horror stories.
Ah! Yeah, I one of my partners was connecting with someone. They had like dated in the past and then reconnected and were thinking about dating again in our like, open, expansive way of dating. And they went on a couple of dates and then they met me at a party and we talked in
Mm,
like a circle, I swear to God, for like 3 minutes about the most surface level conversations of like food and like where they're from and all this stuff. And the next day they called up my partner and said, like, I don't think I could do non-monogamy because of Nicole. I don't like relationship anarchists and people who systematize relationships like this, so I'm not interested in that. And yeah, so I talk about like the
wow.
assumptions of the meme and I was like, dude, this person doesn't even know me. Like this person doesn't even know me. I have no idea what concepts of relationship anarchy you are thinking of. And then also
Wow.
when I was talking about like consent of sharing things, this is something that my partner didn't share with me for months later and they had like redated and came back and I was like, dude, like you should have told me from day one that she didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
date you because of me, not she didn't want to date you because of non-monogamy, which is what I was working on. Was oh, okay,
Mm.
she's struggling with non-monogamy. Is like, no, she's struggling with non-monogamy because I'm a relationship anarchist. I think we can also deconstruct
Interesting.
that a little bit deeper into like
Yeah.
fears. We'll just put it in a
Yeah.
nice way,
What's
like
your
fears. I know
insecurity
I don't want to say
around
it, but
it?
it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that
Yeah,
can,
it's
yeah,
tough. Like I think
yeah,
that's what I don't know about you, like about jealousy and stuff like that, but I feel like once I realized that like there was like a relationship between jealousy and insecurity, I was like, cool. My brain is just trying to protect me and cooking up a bunch of random shit to make me feel this particular way. And once I realized that, I was like suddenly dating multiple like that part of dating multiple people became so much like easier
right,
for me to deal with. I know I still obviously get those twinges of like, what if this
sure,
person leaves me forever? and
Right.
goes off with this other
Right.
person and goes off into the sunset and never wants to
Right.
see me again. Like
Right.
obviously like those like abandonment thoughts like come in,
Right.
but I'm now able to recontextualize them and be like, ooh, like where did that come from? Like I thought we worked on this already. Like where is
Sure.
this resurfacing from? How are we
Right.
like why are we suddenly like, you know,
Yep.
wanting to clutch this person closer and like not able to like think about relationship anarchy in this way? And like vice versa. Like, yeah, just like sitting with that myself and like, you know, letting the other person know, like, hey, I'm experiencing some jealousy.
Right.
And you don't have anything to do about this.
Right.
You don't have to do anything.
Right.
I just need to sit with myself and maybe
Totally.
go talk to another friend and process it with other people.
Yeah.
But yeah, and like as a result, like I feel like whenever I hear those horror stories, I'm like, oh no.
Right. Exactly.
I feel
And then you look at your partner, you're like, why didn't that read as a horror story for you? And you wanted to date her again? I was like, oh no, you know, like absolutely. Because I think it's an indication. I like to think about it as indications of insecurities and desires, right? Like it's also an indication of like, I want this, I want that. And often we're not really sure. It's usually, I feel like, a mix of both, right? And so like trying to get clarity on that. And so like often, like you're saying, coming to it with curiosity rather than being like, this is where I'm at and it's definitive. It's like, okay, I'm having this reaction. Like what insecurities are coming up? What desires are coming up? How can I take a deep breath? Right. And then communicate that to the people around me. And I think it's important that like jealousy is not going to go away. It's our relationship to it is going to change. And particularly on the desire space, even if you process all of the insecurities, the desire thing is going to come up. Right. And so I try to think about it more of like a bad trip, quote, quote, on psychedelics, right? Like there is no like, never having a bad trip again. I'm such a badass, like psychonaut who's done this so many times that like you can't challenge me, right? It's like, no, in the wrong set and setting, you are going to have a challenging experience. And so, how can we look at our mindset of maybe insecurities or the setting of an emotionally unavailable partner and be like, hey, that's actually where this is coming from. Let's get clear here, right? So, rather than this, like, I'll never have a bad trip again, it's like, what's our relationship to it?
Yeah, and it's also too like jealousy is a biological response. Like it's popping up to be like, we want you to survive. How are we going to like, you know, cook that like chemical brain soup up there to like, you know, stir up that pot of like you moving towards the thing like at your base needing to survive. Like this person like provides you a lot of safety and security and joy, and suddenly, you know, that like is at risk in your biological body. Yeah.
Right. Perceived risk, potentially.
Yes.
Right. Right. Yes. And I know we're talking about a lot of the difficulties of relationship anarchy. So I'd be curious to hear about some of the joys in your life.
Sure. Like for me, it's like for the first time in my life, I have like felt saturated. Like my cup is filled, and sometimes like, you know, overfilled, but like it's a great thing to feel overfilled on in a way. Like sometimes I'm stressed about that. I'm like, no, damn, like so many people like love me and I love so many other people and this feels so good. And like we're not remembering that like, yeah, like I also can then like by extension like recognize and love myself more. And that's like always obviously an ever evolving and like ever growing thing. It's like trying to, you know, make space to love oneself as well as like the community around you. But yeah, like it's been so joyful to like, you know, stumble into like beautiful relationships with other people because of that ability to be open and to, you know, experience like no one telling me what I can do with my body or what I can do with like my love or how to spend my time with other people, which I feel like was like inherent to the way of monogamy, like similarly to you, the Christian like version of monogamy and the way it worked, you know, it's like you should only be like loving your partner and like emotional cheating and etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like a whole other can of worms.
Totally. Very happy to be far from the world of emotional cheating. Whoa. Oh my God. Oh my God. You can only have one emotional connection. Whoa. Wow. That is usually where, as a therapist, when someone says that, I try to not like define things is healthy or unhealthy, because I think that it was particularly in that power dynamic, it's really important that you don't do that. But when I hear that someone is only allowed to have an emotional connection with one person, I do come in and say that does not
Yeah.
sound healthy. I have to, like I can't just sit at that and be like, okay, that's fine. That's not, no, no. At minimum, family should be an emotional connection, folks. Like at minimum,
Yeah.
chosen by like I'm Jesus, but I think I'm preaching to the choir here, so I'll get off that
No.
soapbox and like just let it ride.
No, it's fine. I'm just smiling because I'm just like, I can't believe like if emotional cheating were like described to me earlier in life, I would have been like a serial cheater because I just would
Yeah,
I have a big mouth, so I would just like talk to anybody about anything, like if provoked at the right time and not read any social cues
sure,
and be like, let me tell you what's going on in my life. Ugh. And be like,
right.
wow, actually that person isn't the person I'm dating, but they're still giving me support and help, and that's so sweet. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah,
Yeah.
so anyway, yeah, it's
I
wild.
know. Right, right. And I think that's paired in a world of literally only having one emotional connection. And often that level of emotional connection is then what is connected to sex, right? Because no one thinks about emotional cheating with like a family member. I mean, like, oh yeah, like, like, no, it's in this world of, oh, if you're this connected, it also means that you're fucking this person, right? And so then that level of all of that, and then we get somewhere around here, and we're like, okay, interesting. So I think it's
Yeah,
that. And then also, yeah, to like just hold space for like you, and I feel like all of the listeners who are tuning in to like just feel that level of joy that you're speaking to, that saturation of having so many deep connections and the liberty of your body, right? To be able to connect and live your life in community self-governance, right? I mean, that is so powerful. And I hope that people can feel that in your voice. I hope people can feel that in my voice when I talk about it, and truly be like moved by that, truly be like, what are these people doing? Because like I'm curious, they sound happy, like what is that,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Like feed people's curiosity.
Yeah.
That's always what I strive to do. Like in addition to a relationship anarchy, like helping me with a lot of this interpersonal stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
also with like personal like self growth and all of the things that we've been discussing over the
Yeah.
last hour or so. Like also play is so big. Like I have become so much more of a playful and goofy
Right.
person, or like letting
Good.
myself feel that again, feel like a child again, and get like
Yeah. So
curious. And
good.
yeah, it's just so much fun and things that I
Yeah.
never would have thought myself like capable of doing as an adult. Like I find
Yeah.
myself returning to that space, and it's lovely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Learning to play in your relationships rather than the ball and chain, right? What a world.
Mm-hmm.
What a world.
Wow. Who knew?
Who knew they could actually feel good? Whoa. And the final question we have is what do you wish other people knew about relationship anarchy?
Mm. Well, I think about I will admit I did at one point come out to my parents. I came out to my parents like the night before my sister's wedding, and both of
Whoa.
them were like very drunk.
Oh,
So this was like an interesting scenario. My dad, for context, like actually has not only does he have a cousin who's gay, but he has a cousin who has a husband and a girlfriend.
okay.
So like he's had like examples of that. So like for the most part, he was like, yeah, okay, well,
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
cool,
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
And
yeah.
my mom was just looked at me and she's like, won't you be sad? And I
Whoa.
was
Whoa.
like, what? And she's like, won't you be sad? And I was trying to like, feel into that. And I think she was thinking that like about relationship anarchy being like kind of thing where you just like have sex with a bunch of people and then like don't
Have
have that intimacy on top of it.
sure.
And I was like thinking to myself, like, in my life, I actually have less hookup sex with people now that I'm practicing relationship anarchy, which has been interesting,
Yeah,
but
right.
also like reminding me that it's like, wow, shit, like I'm choosing to like engage with this as like a way to like add like another layer or spiciness to intimacy that I already have separate from this practice. And like in some ways for some people it's like things that we do for play, and other ways
Mm-hmm.
it's like a way that we express intimacy on like a completely different level. And like it depends on if I'm
Mm-hmm.
like quote unquote dating the person versus not dating the person. And
Right.
like when people hear relationship anarchy, like for example, like my parents, when I was describing it, they were just like, yeah, it's like about, you know, this one layer of things, and it's like not wanting commitment, it's like being afraid of commitment, it's being like wanting to have sex with like a bunch of people. I'm like, no, 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 it's not that at all. It's
Right.
just like a fun, as you said, it's a practice, it's a fundamental way of just like, you know, moving through the world and living and listening to your body and listening to other people's bodies and plugging into that collective. And yeah, it's wild.
Mm. So beautifully said, right? So beautifully said. And I hope that
Thank you.
the world can learn to see more of that through examples like this conversation, through taking the time to like really slow down and be present with your parents, right? In that, and really share a little bit of your world with them, right? Those are brave acts that you're doing, I'm doing with, you know, all of these conversations and the people in our world who don't understand us, who judge us, right? To really slow down and as much as we can safely, right? Like
Yeah,
share what this world is to us and open up some of their perspectives.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has been so lovely. I appreciate
Yeah.
you so much,
So
Nicole.
good.
This
It's
has
been
been
such a
so fun.
joy. Yes, of course. I want to hold a little bit of space too in our joy, in our connection, just to check in and see if there are any other things you want to share with the listener. And so I'm going to take that deep breath. And yeah, if there's any last words you have, you can share them. Otherwise, I can guide us towards a closing question.
Sure. Sorry, I just looked at my notes.
Yeah.
And I wrote underneath, like in a bullet point, like what I wish people knew. And I wrote underneath, not a free pass to be a shithead with no accountability.
Yes.
But that's
That's a
something
direct
else.
way to say it, but I think
Yeah,
you've
yeah.
definitely hit
I was like,
that.
wow, okay.
No,
Cool.
but it's true.
Um,
It's true. We've talked about that,
it's
right?
true.
Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
like you.
Oh, and there was this quote too, that I thought of you
Mm.
about we had in my book group last night. To get the rewards of being loved, you must submit to the mortifying ordeal of being known. I don't know who
Mm.
said it, but that
Mhm.
was just something that we opened our book group with. And I also figured that
That's
could be
beautiful.
something you can splice in if you decided.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I like it right here
that's.
where it belongs, right? I mean, I think that just goes back to at least what I'm thinking about is, yeah, like these moments where, you know, I am doing my best, I'm trying, and then someone will be like, "Hey, like that wasn't helpful." And you're like, "Okay, great." Like that's some of the vulnerability of being known is getting those feedbacks of like loving, you know, perspectives and yeah, being able to open up when people do judge us, right? And to like stand in what we know to be true, right? Like that's a lot of vulnerability of being known. And so I
Mhm.
really appreciate you taking that step today to come on to the podcast. Trust me to have this conversation with all of the listeners from around the world that are tuning in, right? Who are mostly relationship anarchists. So you're in good community, but still it's a big act of vulnerability to really trust me and come into the space. So I want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great.
Yeah.
And like, thank you for making my first podcast interview like
Hell
feel
yeah.
so easy and natural.
Good.
So
Hell
appreciate
yeah.
that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Happy to be your first. Yeah. Well, with that, I will ask you the last final question that I ask everyone on the podcast. And that is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
um, I don't know. Mm, I talk to myself a lot. I feel like that's something I wish people knew was more normal. Sometimes, like when I'm like talking to myself, people are like, "Are you talking to me?" And I'm like, "No." And then they just give me this look like, What are you doing?" And I'm like, just talking, maybe talking to the plants too, because plants also like to hear us and hear our voices. Like they're attuned to us just as much as we're attuned to them. So like talking to non-human other than human entities is totally normal and fine. And I feel like most people do it to like pets, but
I was gonna say, do you know how much I talk to Fat Cat? Hi, lover. What do you need? Oh, this. Oh, okay. You know, like it's just like it might also be
yeah.
because I live alone with her, right? So then, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like alone is relative, right? I have different partners over every night, you know, so pretty much so. So it's like, what is alone? But like relatively so, it's me and Fat Cat. So
absolutely.
Fat Cat and I are always talking. And yeah, like what does it mean to be in more deeper connection, a reflection of everything that we've talked about, right? To be able to have that conversation with yourself, whether it's out loud, whether it's in a journal, right? Or into these deeper spaces of connection with other people, other beings, right? I think holding more space for that intimacy and that connection is deeply interconnected to relationship anarchy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I think that would be probably what I would choose.
Yeah, great. Well, it has been such a joy to have you on the podcast. And so I want to say thank you again for joining me and sharing with all of the listeners today.
Yeah, and thank you, Nicole. I really appreciated this again. And yeah, I look forward to, well, I don't usually like listening back to my voice, but you know, I will probably listen to I'll listen to your other episodes.
Great. I love that for you. Yes, it's so awesome. I understand that feeling.
It must be hard having a podcast and be like, I can't listen to anything that I put out because I've spent like so many hours editing it.
Well, for sure. I edit it every week myself, so I hear it every time, and then once I've published it, it's like a one-time listen, and then we're gone. Like the past,
goodbye.
Is the past. Goodbye. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for joining us today. It's been so fun.
Of course. Yeah, I hope you have a good one and stay cool. It's hot here in Vermont. So.
If you enjoyed today's episode, then leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. And head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to get resources and learn more about all the things we talked about on today's episode. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.